time to stoke the fires, gather around, and prepare for an evening of strange and supernatural tales. Tonight, Campfire Creepers, our buddy Jim Harold is here. That's next on the Paranormal 60.
I'm not gonna stand here and listen to this baloney. He won't know. He doesn't stand for baloney.
Sounds like a lot of supernatural baloney to me. Supernatural, perhaps. Baloney, perhaps not.
Oh, good evening, my little darklings. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you all had a great Cinco de Mayo. For those of you that were home and online last night, you might have caught a very special presentation of the Paranormal 60. We returned with our Cinco de Makeover episode. My special guest, Jeff Belanger, and his daughter, Sophie, and my two daughters, Ripley and Pacey, were here to paint our faces as we told stories of the supernatural. We had a great time, so thank you to all who tuned in and all the very kind and loving remarks that were made about our daughters and the fun work that they did with our makeup. Next year, we will be back, and God help them, the girls have agreed to let Jeff and I do their makeup. That'll be next year on Cinco de Makeover. Let's get started in tonight's program because I can never say enough about this guy. He started his podcast in 2005 and has been rolling ever since. He was one of the reasons that I wanted to come back to radio and do the paranormal. A lot of people think, well, it's Art Bell and George Norrie, and they were, of course, predecessors. They've been around for years doing this. But when I started hearing Jim Harold's paranormal podcast and his campfires, I knew that I wanted to do something like this right here in Minnesota to reinvigorate the theater of the mind and engage people in new ways. It was the beginning of a new era. The paranormal was just beginning to swell on TV and in books and radio form. And this is one of the first guys I got a chance to listen to. Fantastic presenter, an amazing interviewer, and he's become a good friend over the years. And I'm so pleased to have him back. He has a brand new book out, ladies and gentlemen. It is his sixth in the series, True Ghost Stories, Jim Harold's Campfire, Volume 6. And he is here with us tonight to share some of these stories and talk to us about the paranormal. Jim Harold, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Dave, and very kind words. And I mean, the feeling is mutual. I mean, within a few months, because I had to check, I had to make sure that I started a little bit before you, because it's like, Dave has been around forever. And you're one of the pioneers as well. And you've done the TV thing, and now you're doing a great thing with video. And you're king of all paranormal media. So those nice words coming from you mean a lot, and they mean so much. I wanted to bring something special to the table tonight, so I thought I'd bring my own little campfire.
Oh, look at you. You are fancy. I was trying to figure out, I know there's some way to have the background above us be a video, and I know that I could make a fire video, but I was just like, you know what? I messed around. I couldn't figure out the right way to do this. I know I'll have to talk to you off air, because when it comes to being the guy for all nerd aspects of this, you always are ahead of the curve. You're like, I remember talking to you once. You're like, well, I just traded out my X2 caliber microphone for the new ZX40 Zenith 12, which has a inflow take with micro. And I was like, what did you say? And you said, it may not be audibly different to the listeners, but I hear the difference, Dave. And I thought, this guy is amazing. And he takes what he does seriously. And I think that's why people love tuning in and watching you evolve over the years and bring the show. For people that may have been living in a cave somewhere and just finally walked out and stumbled upon my podcast, and this is the first they're hearing of Jim Harold. Jim, why the paranormal? What brought you to the idea of launching a paranormal radio show?
Well, it basically boiled down to this. I had gone to school for broadcasting, and I was a frustrated broadcaster because I was working behind the scenes on the advertising side and stuff, and learned a lot and worked for big conglomerates and CBS radio in different places, but I didn't get that chance to get behind the mic. I got into sales, got married, had kids, and it was like, I can't go to Paducah and start from the ground up. So I thought, I heard about this thing called podcasting, but I'm like, well, if I'm going to podcast, I don't want to just podcast on anything. I want to podcast on something that truly interests me. And I thought about politics. I'm not going to add anything. Music, you can't do music. Sports, I mean, I love sports, but I'm not an expert. But what is something that nobody's really an expert on? It's the paranormal. And since I was a little kid, I loved In Search Of. I devoured books about the Bermuda Triangle. Later on, Unsolved Mysteries. Of course, Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell, George Norrie, and the late, great Ian Punnett, who we just recently lost, which was devastating. And other great hosts that have gone on, such as yourself, Richard Serrett, and so forth. But all those things made me think, you know what, I can't do what they do. But I listened in those early days in 2005 to some of those podcasts. And I heard people like Leo Laporte and Adam Curry, and like, oh my God, I can't do what they do. But then I listened to some of the homemade podcasts. And like, I can do that. And, I thought this will be great, Dave. I think my first guest was maybe Lloyd Auerbach, and my second guest was Stanton Friedman, a UFO legend. And I thought this will be great. I'll do this for 6 months, and I'll have this paranormal stuff figured out. Well, as you know, you don't figure it out. And I have more questions now than I did almost 19 years ago. So that's what led me to it. And I'm still not bored with it. I'm still fascinated. I just got off of a campfire call that was unlike any story I ever heard. And there's always new things. It never gets boring.
Well, you say that, there's more questions now than even when you began. I think I've mentioned that on this show, that when I started, I kind of had my little pigeonholes. This exists here. This exists here. What type of thoughts have you seen change for yourself in regards to the supernatural and the paranormal?
Well, I'll take one that's easy one, and we've talked about it many times, ghosts. I thought before necessarily ghosts were dead people. End of story. And I still think sometimes they probably are the spirits of dead people. But of course, we know the difference between sentient hauntings and residual hauntings that are replays. But then, and we've had many conversations about this, how many of these are time slips? How many times are we seeing people from the past or from the future, and they're seeing us? And that doesn't get into things like interdimensional travelers or evil entities, which I do believe exist, even though I don't think everything is a demon, which I think a lot of people tend to think, oh, it's a demon. I think that's more rare than people think, but I think those kind of things exist. So the explanation for any one phenomena has blossomed to maybe one thing to a myriad of things. I think it's very similar to your journey, and I think a lot of people have that journey. And then sometimes I even wonder, not everything, but sometimes are these things interconnected? I had interviewed Whitley Strieber, who I know you've spoken to many times.
Right.
And I think it was his wife, Ann Strieber, who has passed. And she said something to him about this visitation phenomena, the visitors, that it has something to do with death. Now that totally blew my mind, because I never associated aliens with death, and I'm not exactly sure that I do now, but it opened my mind to another possibility. I know that's what you try to do on your shows. I try to do on my shows. I want people to think about the possibilities and not necessarily latch on to the first possibility. Now, does that mean I think that Aunt Mildred might come and visit you and give you a beautiful sign? I absolutely do. I think those things exist, but I think a lot of other things exist too.
Jim, in looking at the overall view of the paranormal and how it's kind of developed over the last 20 years here, do you feel that we've really gotten any further or deeper into an understanding of what's going on? Do you think science is really taking a look, or has it been cursory looks that they have kind of brushed aside with the back of their hand as they move forward with how do we ruin the earth quicker?
Well, I think what's happening is that, and again, I'm not an expert on science, so I'll just get that out there right now. But I think that there are a lot of things going on in science that kind of hint at the possibility and the probability of paranormal phenomena being real, quantum physics and co-location. And we've talked about things like the idea of retrocausality, something I do, today may affect the past, which blows my mind. So my point is I think that these things are happening that are kind of lending credence to the paranormal, but they're not being connected to the actual paranormal. It's like a Venn diagram that doesn't meet. You've got science over here that's probably, just the other day, I read something, I forget what it was, that this particular finding might turn physics totally on its head. And but these things are happening over here. The paranormal stuff is happening over here, and unfortunately, there's not that much overlap, and that's kind of the sad thing. Now, occasionally, and I'm sure you've talked to them as well, there are scientifically minded people, academic type people, who take this seriously and kind of step in both worlds. And I love to talk to those people because they kind of get both sides of it. I wish there were more of them, and I wish there were more acceptance. And for example, when I talk about science and the fact that there's a new finding that might turn physics on its head, this happens all the time. That's the problem that I have with the hardcore skeptics, not someone who is reasonably skeptical. I understand that. But the hardcore skeptics who say, absolutely, there can be nothing to this. Leave me alone. Go off with your cuckoo woo-woo ideas. Yeah, but science is wrong so many times. It's right so many times. I mean, we're doing something right now. You're old enough to remember. You used to have to be Ted Koppel and have a satellite, right?
Right.
We're doing it now from our home studios. It's amazing. So I love science. Science is great. Science does great things, but it's not infallible. It's not perfect, and it does not have all the answers.
Agreed. And I love the fact that you bear witness to this as well, because I've spoken to some great people throughout the years, and you've mentioned quite a few of them, forward thinkers, people that are based in the scientific community. I think a lot of people forget Stanton Friedman wasn't just some bushy eyebrowed lunatic.
He was a rocket scientist.
Right. The guy was a legitimate rocket scientist and believed in UFOs and UAPs and the things that were there. He is the one that helped to reinvigorate the interest in Roswell all those years later and interview and find the people to talk about these cases. There are real science principles that have taken place in examining these things. But I think, and I don't know where you stand on this, I think a big aspect of this is science can't replicate it easily. So therefore, it's hard to put in a bin like science likes to do. They can say, we had this experience, but we can't tell where it came from.
Right. You can't,
so we can't say it's a ghost or aliens or interdimensional, but it is weird.
You can't weigh it on a scale. You can't measure it in a test tube. And those are the things that science excels at. And when you say, well, this isn't really measurable in a laboratory, then they say, well, we don't want to hear it. It doesn't, if you can't do these things, then it doesn't exist. But I'll give you an example of something where people in science have kind of gravitated towards a more kind of what many people would consider paranormal. And that's in the area of near-death experience. Dr. Sam Parnia and people like that have done these studies of these magnificent near-death experiences. And the thing that gets me about those, Dave, the excuse is, oh, well, those are the throes of a dying brain. That's, very flooding of chemicals to ease you into the dying process. And this is an evolutionary defense mechanism. But the point is that then how do you explain somebody can be flatlining or unconscious? They can describe in great detail the people in the room who are working on them in the operating room while they're in crisis, while they're completely out or flatlining. And they can talk about what they are wearing. They could talk about what they were doing, specific things about medical procedures they'd have no way of knowing, gestures. Real quickly, I had a guest on who said he was a skeptic and he's a doctor. And he said he got a report from a man that said they was being operated on, and the physician was, the surgeon was flapping his arms like a chicken. And this doctor thought, this is crazy. This doesn't make any sense. Turns out, though, that when they were doing the procedure, that to keep things sterile, he would point to them with his elbows. Give me the scalpel. Give me the
sure.
give me So it made him look like he was flapping his arms like a chicken. And this guy would have no way of knowing that. How do you explain that, Dave? That's my problem with the hardcore, cynical skeptics. No room for the unknown.
Right. And that's kind of the beauty of the paranormal, is that we can explore this. And you mentioned something in the opening I find equally fascinating, right? Is you're almost 20 years into delivering these stories, speaking to experiencers, scientists, investigators, and it hasn't gotten boring. Isn't that strange? I mean, you would think by now, and I've thought many times, what more is there to possibly talk about? And then I talk to a guest who engages a different part of my thought process or brain or imagination and allows me to continue beyond where I thought I was comfortable before. And that's really remarkable. There's not many fields of study that you can continually find new aha moments.
Mm-hmm. And it probably happens to me a few times a month where I'm just like, whoa, I never thought about it that way. And you would think maybe I'll just have a very small brain, Dave. But you would think that after this much time, you will have thought of every possible angle. But no.
No, that's the amazing thing. And another part that I love that you've always done is having your listeners engage, sharing their stories. And you've always found fun and fascinating ways to let them be part of your universe, which of course I did with Darkness Radio and continue to do here on the Paranormal 60. Now you are on your 6th campfire book. So for those of you that don't know, True Ghost Stories, Jim Harold's Campfire Volume 6. We have a link for that book on today's program guide, or if you're listening, you can find it in the program guide whenever you're tuned in. And this is your 6th volume. You go deep, and this isn't just ghost stories, right? I mean, you've kind of got a nice myriad of different type of experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to mention, if you didn't, it's really should be called True Ghost Stories and More, because a lot of these fall into that weird kind of nether region, kind of, it's neither fish nor fowl. It's not, you can't really categorize. I mean, we've got some UFO stories in there. We've got some straight up ghost stories in there. We've just got some really weird stuff in there. And there's 65 stories. And what we do is we'll take, and I haven't done one of these for 8 years. So these stories are a few years old, which is kind of nice because I had, as we were reviewing them, I had forgotten some of them. I'm like, how did I forget that one? That's a great one. So along with my assistant producer, Maddie, and my wife, we got a pool of stories that Maddie selected, and I went through and I said, no, I don't want that one. I do want that one. And let's add this one in. And collectively, we came up with the stories, gently rewrote them, just to flow, but I didn't add any details. And there's different ways of approaching this. The way we've kind of approached it has been kind of a minimalist, where we're just kind of, this is the way it was presented to us. And then we clean it up for grammar and fun stuff like that. And try to make it, very readable. I hate to say it, but it's a great bathroom book.
Don't hate to say it. That's what I always tell people with my book. It's a perfect paranormal bathroom reader.
Yeah.
You can knock out a story in a sitting and move on with your day.
Sitting, yeah.
Then you could be reading 14 books at the same time. This is just a quick little boom.
Yeah, exactly. And the other piece is you could read a couple stories before you go to bed, but sometimes if you get the wrong one, it might not be that conducive to sleep. But so far, I mean, we've had some advanced readers look at it, and it's getting good feedback, and it's actually going to be released tomorrow, May 7th.
That's fantastic. So make sure, again, folks, when you pick up the book, don't just pick it up, read it, and then make sure to go rate and review the book. And there's 5 other volumes you can select from as well, so you can get the entire collection and keep up with all of the strange and supernatural hijinks Jim Harold has been sharing for the last 19 years. Is it hard to believe for you? I mean, dude, I'm on 18 years this year, and it's like that. I can't believe it. And you're heading into the 20.
Yeah, it really is. It's like, oh my God. It's like, well, first of all, I never thought this was going to be a career. I never thought this was going to be my job. And the funny thing, we talked about retro causality. And when I worked in radio, I always liked to watch other people do their jobs. I went in to the production people and probably spent too much time there bugging them, watch how they did their job. I go into the traffic department, people not in the know, that's where they they make the logs and they put where the commercials are going to go on. I watch them do their job. I even go in and kind of snoop around and see what the business manager did. And I never knew why. And in this job, other than having a radio tower in my backyard, it's very much like, and you could probably speak to this as well, it's like having a little radio station.
Yeah.
With the ads and, everything you've got to do that people don't see. And where I say retro causality might come in for me, because that's one that I'm really very hot on now. I'm just like, this is such an amazing comment. Maybe me doing this informed myself in the past to pay attention to those other people doing their job so I would be equipped to do what I do. That's a mind bender. And I also think it's totally possible.
I do too. Very cool. Well, let's go in, and I'm just curious, with coming in with a story for us here. Has there been any element of the paranormal that's come your way that over the years has fallen apart for you? I've never really thought about that aspect of it, but has there been a part for you that just seems less plausible the longer you go?
The one that I have a crisis with on a regular basis, I don't think we have a Bigfoot story, and here's Bigfoot. Now, let me say, I am not saying that there is not such a thing as Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but if you ask me the one that I'm probably more skeptical about now than when I started, that's probably it. And the way I always put it, Dave, is this. Depending on the day of the week, I am either a skeptic or I'm a believer. The day that I'm skeptical, I'll wake up and say, well, they've not found a body. And I know the reasons that people say they don't find bodies. They take care of their own. They go off to die. You don't find dead deer in the middle of the woods. And I understand all that. And then that's the skeptic day. It's like they've not found it. We surely would have seen like great quality video at this point. Then the next day I'll wake up and it's like, I think I believe in Bigfoot. Think about all the forestry workers. Think about all of the, outdoors men and women, if that is a word, who know the woods, know nature, and they know a bear when they see it. And they said, that ain't no bear. Plus, I look at the remastered Patterson-Gimlin film, and with it being slowed down and stabilized, that looks like muscle tone. So on those days, I'm a believer. But I mean, I never want to, and this goes back to the book, I never want to discount experiencers. I believe, and I'm sure, you talk to many people who have these kinds of stories. The vast majority of people, I think, are being very straight with us about what they're experiencing and communicating it to us as best they can. Does that mean every single case is something paranormal? Probably not. But are many of them paranormal? I believe that they are. And I believe these people when they tell stories. And I could probably count on one hand over, all these years where someone I thought was just, throwing me a line. I really believe my callers are very sincere, and I'm sure you feel the same way about your folks.
Agreed. And you heard it here first, folks. Jim Harold hates Bigfoot and does not believe in him. So I'm glad we could break that news. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll stoke the campfire and launch in with the tale. We'll do that next, right here on the Paranormal 60. The Oregon Bigfoot Festival and Beyond is back and bigger than ever at Oaks Amusement Park, Saturday, June 29th. Meet Bigfoot hunters like Ronnie LeBlanc of Discovery Channel's Expedition Bigfoot and Paranormal Caught on Camera, and paranormal investigators like me, Dave Schrader of the Holzer Files and the Paranormal 60 podcast. Join us for a day of family fun celebrating Bigfoot, ghosts, UFOs, and everything beyond. You never know what you'll find. Don't miss the Oregon Bigfoot Festival and Beyond, Saturday, June 29th at Oaks Amusement Park. Get tickets today at OregonBigfootFest.com. OregonBigfootFest.com.
The Oregon Bigfoot Festival. Oregon Bigfoot Festival.
All right, friends. I'm reading your comments. I'm getting messages. StreamYard is a strange little bug. I don't know what's going on. Jim, I'm hearing you perfectly. You're coming through great and clear. Some people are saying your voice is real low, real quiet. Others are saying they can hear you perfectly. So I don't know what's going on.
I don't know.
Yeah, but you sound good to me. So for those of you listening to the audio only version, I'm sure you're going to get it just fine. Our guest tonight, Jim Harold, is the host of the Jim Harold Paranormal Podcast and Campfire Tales. And here is his 6th book, True Ghost Stories, Jim Harold's Campfire Volume 6. We have a link for it on today's program guide. Please go check it out. Get yourself a copy of the book. Let's launch into a couple of Campfire Tales, Jim. When you go through and you're separating, it's got to be like, for me, it's so hard. I have so many great stories to pick from. I cherry picked in this first batch and I thought, I don't know if I'm going to have anything nearly as good for the second book. And as I'm digging through these stories, I'm like, holy crap, this could have gone in the first book. This could have gone, oh, these all could be in the first book. Is it hard for you to separate out tales and find the right ones to put into that blend?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, that is a real process to go through, and there's some that were like on the edge, and I said, no, let's look for something a little stronger. And I really believe that that I could probably do, these stories were probably from about 10 years ago, so I could probably do at least another 6 books if I didn't do another show. So we've got a ton of stories to select from, but I really do believe, and I'm not just saying this, I think this is the strongest of all the books. And
Thesis himself says, newsflash, buddy, Bigfoot doesn't believe in you either. Love to Jim.
I said today's one of my believer days. But
That's
anyway, right. the point being that, yeah, it's tough, but I feel blessed to have such a wealth of stories to choose from. It's pretty cool.
All right, where are we going to begin tonight?
Well, here's one from Ed from Texas. And I love workplace stories because we often hear about haunted houses and so forth. Mm-hmm. But I love to hear these stories when people are working it. And Ed was in Texas in 2004. He was in California, and he was a forklift operator at a paper mill. And his job would be to take these containers of paper, and they would have like water or something in them. He would drain off the water, and then he would put them down into this pit where they would be disposed of. So that was his job. Mm-hmm. And he was down in this basement doing this job, operating the forklift. And it was late at night. He was there, there were a couple other guys, but it was pretty deserted. So anyway, he picks up this container of paper and he starts rotating it. And he was, watching it very closely because he has to make sure that he only dumps out the water. He's being very meticulous. And he looks to the side and he saw something off in the distance, about 30 feet. And it was on the floor and it looked like a person and it was crawling. But not only was it crawling not the way a normal human was, but its face was facing up. This person's like he was crawling backwards. Yes. Yeah. And not only that, he did it very, very quickly. He went from about 30 feet away from Ed to about 3 feet in front with him within seconds. This person moved very, very fast. He looked around and it had disappeared. And he thought, oh my God. And it really freaked him out. In fact, it freaked him out so much, they had a little shack there where they could rest. And he immediately got off of his machine and he stayed there the rest of the shift. He didn't move another container because he's just like, could you imagine if you would see a person basically crawling upside down? He said he was looked like he had blonde hair. It looked like he was Caucasian, blonde hair, had a work uniform on. And it basically crawled, between 30 to 3 feet to him. So anyway, a few days later, one of his colleagues was training him on another job, breaking him in, as they used to say, I think, in industry, breaking him in on a job. And he said, hey, Ed, I was here the other night and I saw the weirdest thing. I saw this weird thing crawling, and he described exactly the same kind of situation. So at first they thought, the folks in the mill, they like to play tricks on each other.
Right.
And they asked around, and somebody said, no, there's no tricks. And then he said, well, did anything ever happen in this place? And did anybody ever die or anything? And they said, yeah, there have been a couple. And one Ed didn't describe because he said it was way too gruesome. But there was another one apparently where there was an intern who was working there, college student, and it sounded like maybe he didn't know what he was doing, inexperienced. And the accident resulted in him getting crushed by a 1,000-pound cabinet.
Oh, geez.
And he died, basically broke him in half. And Ed is wondering if that was that person, that creepy crawling thing. Now, that's the thing, Dave. This story is a perfect example. How do you categorize that? What is that? Is it a ghost? Is it a cryptid, kind of like semi-human crawler? I don't know how you categorize that. I just call them head scratchers.
I call that nope. That's what I call it. Nope.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that's why I won't do that kind of work. It seems like it's wrought with nasty, creepy stuff when you work. I hear all of these places that are, workforce factories and places like that have a lot of strange stories. I just, off the beaten path, talking about the paranormal and work. This last weekend, I was talking to this realtor, and he goes, I love listening to the show. I love hearing all the weird stories. He goes, all these years I've been in houses. I've never gotten the creeps. I've never felt like it's haunted. I've had people tell me it's haunted. Mm-hmm. I've never noticed that house sells well. I hear from the owners that have taken it. They never complained about it. He said, but about a year ago, I go in, they're putting the house up for sale. I'm doing a walkthrough, and I'm down in the basement, and I go over to check the sump pump and check what's going on. And I turn around, and there's a little girl sitting on the stairs, and she's in a really pretty little floral dress, and she's just kind of kicking her legs. And I said, oh, what are you doing? And she goes, I was going to ask you the same thing. And he said, oh, I'm just, your parents are selling the house, so I'm just giving it a walkthrough to look at anything I think might need to be fixed or cleaned or painted. And she goes, oh, okay. And he talks to her for a few minutes, and she just gets up and goes upstairs, shuts the door. He goes around, and about a week or two later, he says he goes back out there, goes to the house. As he goes back down into the basement, he sees the little girl again, and she's in the same dress. And he said, and I got that unnerved feeling of this, there's something off about this situation right now. I just know it. So he is talking to her again as he's getting stuff ready and taking some pictures down in the basement. And then he turns and takes a picture towards the little girl sitting on the stairs. He goes and shows me this photograph. So you see the basement, you see all these things, and you pan back at the stairs, and you see the stairs, but it's all washed out looking like a 1970s Polaroid gone bad. It's just this white spot kind of washed out. He goes, I get done, I go upstairs, she's already back up there. I go to the woman, hey, everything looks great. You guys are, everything's up to code. He goes, can I ask you something? Your daughter has the prettiest dress. My daughters won't even wear dresses. And this woman's jaw just popped. And he goes, she's not your daughter, is she? And she goes, nope. And he goes, have you seen her? And she goes, yep. And he goes, were you going to tell me about her? Nope. He goes, what is this? She goes, oh, we have no idea. We've lived here. We've seen her for years. She just is here. We're not frightened by her. I would say more unnerved at the way she just shows up, but she's never been frightening. She's always inquisitive. That's just the way it is. I'm boggled by the fact that if I have a little girl ghost that keeps appearing to me and everybody in my family, how do you not do some research and try to find out who this kid is?
Yeah. No, I agree with you there.
Now, as a realtor, he's like, now I question everything. Every time I go in, he goes, I just want to walk up to somebody and give them the look and poke them to make sure they're legitimately there.
But I love those kind of stories because he said something very key. Nothing ever happened to me. And then he has a story. And I will say this. I feel like sometimes, bless people, but sometimes when people say, well, I have 10 things that happened to me, sometimes nothing happened to them. When someone says I have one singular story, that really, really gets my attention. Now, I do think that some people are more sensitive. I do believe that. And I do believe some people pick up on it. It's like a radio tuner. You know, you could
Right.
used to buy like a cheap one, or you buy a super radio, and they're like psychic super radios, and they pick up more stuff. I believe that's a real thing.
Mhm.
But when somebody says, hey, this stuff doesn't happen to me, but there was this one time, that gets my attention. That gets
I love the ones that say it though. They say, I just don't believe in the paranormal, but I had this one thing happen, and they tell you the craziest, freakiest thing, and then they're like, but I don't know if that's paranormal. I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
that is terrifying. And if you can't tell the difference between normal and that, yeah, I don't get it. I understand wanting to shelve it and maybe not face that.
Right.
And maybe they tell us those stories hoping we're going to go, oh no, that's totally natural. Everybody sees a blood red man who looks like he's had his skin removed. No, that's you're right, not paranormal at all.
No, that's true. That's very true. I've got another one that kind of ties
Yes.
into that story if we've got time before the break.
Oh, please, yeah.
This one's called The Mysterious Mrs. Raspberry. I love this one.
Mhm.
So this comes from a caller from Idaho, and she took us back. Jennifer was her name. I just had to check on that. This was back in the early 80s, and her and her little friend, Connie, decided they were going to walk the railroad tracks to the lake, the abandoned railroad tracks to the lake. And this was back in the day, no cell phones. They'd leave in the morning and then they'd come home for dinner. It's kind of that generation. So anyway, they headed off on the abandoned rail tracks that were right around the corner from Jennifer's home. And they walked for about a mile and they got through some woods, and then there was a clearing. And on this clearing was a couple of older houses, and there was a woman putting her wash out on the laundry. And back in the day, older women sometimes would wear house dresses, and this woman was wearing a house dress. And there were some raspberry bushes there. And the woman starts talking to the girls, and she's very nice. She's very sweet. And she said, hey, girls, do you want some raspberries? And they said, sure. So they put their shirt out like a basket, and the woman put some raspberries in each of their little baskets that they made. And they talked with her a little more. They ate their raspberries. Their shirts were stained from the raspberry juice. I'm sure their moms were happy about that. And then they went back on the walk to the lake. And it was another like 3 miles to the lake. It was it was a long walk for two little kids. But they got to the lake. They stayed at the lake most of the day, had fun, and headed back. And they got back to where the lady was, putting out her wash with the houses around to the clearing. They got there, and mind you, this track, there was one way in and one way out. There was no split off. This is one single track.
Mm-hmm.
There were no houses. There was no woman. Just a clearing. No houses, no woman. And they walked back home, and Jennifer, a year before or so she was on Campfire, she talked to her friend, her childhood friend, said, am I remembering this right? And she said, absolutely. In fact, when we got home, we had raspberry stains on our shirts. And Jennifer was a smart little kid. She talked to her grandma and told her what happened at the time. And she said, Grandma, this strange thing happened. This lady was there. She wasn't there. And there were these houses. And she said, where were the houses? And she explained, she said, yeah, there were houses there in the 1920s. And they were torn down when they built the railroad tracks. And that's the story of the mysterious Mrs. Raspberry.
That's cool. So a time slip phenomena.
Yeah, totally. I mean, how do you explain that? I mean, there's stories, Dave, that I say there are two options.
Mm-hmm.
The person's lying or making it up, or it's what we consider paranormal or supernatural. There's no third explanation that I can think of. It's not like it was a single person. She had the affirmation of her friend, and as an adult, her friend confirmed it. So either Jennifer would be making this up, which I don't believe, because there's no percentage in making up this story and telling it to me on a mid-tier podcast. It's not like I'm Joe Rogan. What's the benefit? What's the benefit? Why make it up? So my only conclusion is she experienced something that we would think of as supernatural. Now, it may be the science. It may be science, explicable by science. Maybe it's the science of the 24th century. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that happened. And you've had stories like that. I know that you've shared over the years. There's one that every time we talk,
Let me ask you real quickly.
Go ahead,
Jim. Just out of curiosity, do you think that any of the missing people cases that have popped up might have something to do with these time slips? Do you think there are some that enter and never make their way back out?
Well, you know what that reminds me of? I don't know if I've ever talked to you about this. The man from Torrid. Have I ever talked to you about the man from Torrid? That story?
I don't remember. Let's hear it.
Okay. This is not my story. This is a famous apocryphal story, some would call it urban legend. So the idea is that I think, thank you, Crystal.
Crystal Groff says, Jim, you're better than Joe Rogan. I agree.
My bank account does not agree, though. Oh, sir. Anyway, some people get that of
I'm with you, Mr. Carson.
Yes. But anyhow, what were we saying? We were talking, the man from Torrid. Okay, so here's the story. In the 1960s, a man lands at the airport, Tokyo International Airport.
I do know
and
this,
he presents his papers. And it's a passport and all this documentation, money from a country called Taured, Taured, I think. And the authorities are like, what's Taured? And he's like, well, it's a small country around, close to France. There is no Taured. There's no Taured on any map. So the authorities kind of figuring, what are we going to do with this guy? Is he insane? Did he print up all this stuff? I mean, what's going on? So they put him in a hotel. Now, this story. It's kind of apocryphal. There's not a lot of documentation for it. But they put him in a hotel room and they put guards. And the next morning they were going to deal with him, do whatever they were going to do. And they opened up the hotel room and there was no man from Torrid. That could be an example. Or maybe, again, science, the idea of the multiverse, parallel existence, and if you take it to its conclusion, I think the idea is that there's every possible combination happening at the same time. So in another universe, I'm interviewing you on a show called The Paranormal 60 with Jim Harold about your 6th True Ghost Stories book.
God, we can only hope so.
My point is that it boggles the mind, the possibilities. And you ask me, I think you asked me what I learned before.
Mm-hmm.
What I've learned is that our existence is so much weirder than what we give it credit for. There's so many possibilities. When you go into a dark room and you don't have any light, you just see a little shadow here and a little shadow there. It's like Plato's allegory of the cave. I think that's what we are. We're only seeing shadows. I mean, God knows, I could have half of my dead family right around me right now, and I just can't see them because just like we can't see certain types of light at certain frequencies, I can't see them, but they could all be behind me. Hi, Mom. How you doing? I mean, I know it just sounds like a cop-out.
No.
But it is a weird, weird world.
That it is. Let's take our final break. We'll come back. We've got more with Jim Harold and some more creepy and strange campfire tales when we return right here on the Paranormal 60 with Jim Harold.
Are you troubled by strange noises in the middle of the night? Do you experience feelings of dread in your basement or attic? Have you or your family ever seen a spook, spectre, or ghost? Then Haunted Magazine issue 41 might just be for you. In issue 41 we have The Enfield Haunting, an interview with Dave Schrader, Danny Robbins, and lots more. Out now in stores, app stores, and online at bit.ly/Haunted Magazine. Remember, don't be normal, be paranormal.
Good evening. Welcome. This is the Paranormal 60 with Dave Schrader. For that last second of the last segment, it was almost like we slipped into an alternate universe and it became the Paranormal 60 with Jim Harold. But he is our very special guest tonight. And again, we have a link for his book on today's program guide. So make sure that you go check out the book, get a copy. It officially releases tomorrow. We want to make sure that you've got it. And once you read it, make sure you go rate and review it. You've done such a great job for me on my book. Go do the same for Jim. Make sure you rate and review those books, because the more you rate and review, the more Amazon and the other booksellers open those books to more and more readers. So please take just a few moments to go ahead and do that. A lot of people tuning in, some for the first time. Welcome to our world. This is the Paranormal 60. My little darklings will welcome you in our chat. If you're watching live on Facebook or Instagram or X and you'd like to be part of the live chat, head on over to the Paranormal 60 YouTube channel, and you can watch us live here every Monday and Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Central and be part of our very lively discussion in our chat room with a lot of other great like-minded individuals and two lunatics. I'll let you figure out who those two lunatics are. All right, Jim Harold is here. We're doing some campfire tales, and I don't want to necessarily share just stories from this book, because I want people to pick up this book and read it for themselves and hear it. But over the years, has there been a story that stuck with you that really kind of unnerves you when you think about the elements of the paranormal?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned it, because I thought about it during the break, and actually you talked about missing people and could they be lost in some other dimension. And probably the most popular story in the history of the Campfire Show, and my personal favorite, was from T.I. from Michigan, and it's the Roadhouse Saloon. I'm sure I've told you this story over the years. And it's really one of those cases you wonder, if things would have worked out differently, would T.I. have still been here? And actually, the unique thing about this story is right before the pandemic in 2019, I'm in Ohio here. I drove up to Michigan and with a videographer, and we did a little segment with her, and I met her in person, and I believe her now more than ever. And here's the story. So basically what happened is that T.I. every summer would go to this place up in Wisconsin, this camp, I guess, a campground or something. Her and her family would go up. And this one evening, there was a band playing about an hour away, and her and a friend went up to see it. The guy's name was Bob. So it was T.I. and Bob. So they went up to see this band, and, they really enjoyed themselves. They basically stayed there all night, till the bar closed. Then they even went back, and since they're both musicians, went back and talked with the band members and so forth. So they were heading home about, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. All the bars are closed and so forth. So anyway, they're driving along, in about 10 minutes, T.I.'s like, Bob, nature's calling. I got to go to the bathroom. Mm-hmm. And they're in the middle of a 2-lane highway, totally dark. You know what it's like in rural areas. When you're in the dark, you're in the dark. It's not like being in the city at nighttime. It's pitch black dark. There's nothing open. There's nothing. So he basically said, well, you've got two choices. We can either ride it out or find a bush. And she said, just drive fast. So anyway, they're driving along. And then, like an oasis in the desert, there's this bar, and it's wide open. The joint is jumping. You can hear the thumpa, thumpa, thumpa of the jukebox. Full of cars, neon signs. They go in. And Tia's like, thank goodness, thank goodness. So Bob goes and gets, a couple of refreshments from the bar. She goes to the restroom. They come back, they're talking. And Bob says, I'm really glad we came here, because they have this mural on the wall here, and it's of an Old West scene. And I've heard about it. Bob is an artist, a painter as well, and said, I'm really glad I got to finally see this. And it was, T.I. said it was kind of disconcerting, the way that it was painted. And they were talking and looking around. They realized that everybody on the painting is actually a patron in the bar. And they see like what they would call at the time a dance hall girl, and she's sitting over there at the bar in real life. There's a couple of guys playing cards on the mural. They're playing pool over in the corner. very atmospheric place. They've got this old Wurlitzer jukebox, the old bubbler.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, some guy goes up and he puts on Let's Twist Again by Chubby Checker on the jukebox and comes up and asks T.I. to dance. And he smiles. And he has a mouthful of rotten teeth. He says, "Want to dance?" And T.I. uses a cane, and she holds up her cane and says, "I don't do a lot of dancing." She said she was really glad she had that cane to get her out of that situation. So anyway, just very, very weird. And they keep talking, and they're looking at this mural, and there's these double doors, like in the old-time Western movies, the villain would walk in and say, "I want to see so-and-so. I got a score to settle." Well, there were the swinging doors. They noticed them when they came in, and it was just a pair of swinging doors. But now what they noticed was there was looks like a couple misty columns. And they didn't notice them before. And they're talking like, "When did you notice them?" They look back, and they're becoming a little more formed, almost like a Polaroid picture. One's a little taller, one's a little shorter. And then they talk some more and they look again. And one's obviously a man and the other one's a woman. They talk a little more and they look. And the woman has curly hair. T.I. has curly hair. That's a coincidence. Develops a little more. The woman has cowboy boots. T.I. has cowboy boots. Oh, that's weird. That's weird. Oh, the woman has a cane. That's weird. Let's get out of here.
Yeah.
So they get up. As they get up, and all the people are just kind of spacey and weird in this place. And they're like, when they're getting ready to leave, they're like, "Come back, come back, come back." T.I. said they closed the door. Everything was pitch black. No neon signs, no thump, thump, thump of the music, nothing. It was like it was always closed. They turn around. There are not plural cars in the parking lot. There's one car. It's their car. So basically, he said, "Okay, let's get the heck out of Dodge here." He peels out and they go home. Now, but it's still not over because T.I. is way braver than I am, Dave. You could not pay me enough.
Nope.
To go back to that place. But T.I. is a different breed. She's a strong woman. So she goes with her sister because everybody's like, this is crazy. There's nothing happening. So they go back. She goes with her sister. It's like 8 o'clock at night. She doesn't go at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's the one concession she made.
Right.
And she looked at the mural, and the mural was there, but there were no figures in the double doors. It was just the swinging doors like they were originally. And then she went over to the jukebox. And there are a couple things to note about the jukebox. It was not an old-time Wurlitzer bubbler jukebox. It was, at the time, a modern CD jukebox. And, oh, by the way, there was no Chubby Checker on it anywhere. And with that, one more thing. I almost forgot.
What?
So she goes up to the bartender. And she says, "Hey, I was here the other night. There was this big, burly, good-looking guy, the bartender and stuff." And the woman's like, "There's no bartender like that here. The only two bartenders are here, and me and my elderly father." And with that, she left the Roadhouse Saloon. Now, you need to know the Roadhouse Saloon is a real place. On my YouTube channel, I have a segment with T.I., and there are actual photos of the mural, which were taken by the great Chad Lewis, who you know.
Oh, sure.
Obviously. Yeah. So Chad went up there and took photos, and with his permission, I used it in the video package. And she's so believable. And she came from she's written her own books. T.I. was a very respected I'm not going to say what her profession is. I think she discloses it, but I won't say what it is out of respect to her. But it's very respected. She's retired from it now, but it's like a pillar of the community kind of job. Very intelligent woman, and I believe her. What did she experience? And she even said, to your point, what if we wouldn't have gotten out of there, what would have happened? And I think the place might still be in business. I'm not sure, but people have, I mean, Chad went there and took pictures a few years back, pre-pandemic, I think. And people have reported through the years that they've been there and so forth. And it was also featured on the Spooked podcast. I actually, they contacted me about some stories and I shared it with them, and they reached out to TI as well. So, I mean, it's quite the story. And I mean, somebody said it's like the Twilight Zone. It really is worthy of a Twilight Zone episode.
No doubt. Very strange. Hey, I do have to make a quick mention, folks. The weekend is coming up quick on us. I know, Dave, it's Monday. How quick can it be? Trust me, it'll be here before you can know it. And I'll be at Hillview Manor in Pennsylvania. There are still a few VIP tickets and ghost hunt and investigation tickets still available. You can find information at darknessevents.com, darknessevents.com. Come on out and join me at one of the most haunted locations in all of Pennsylvania. And our tickets are available for the final Palmer House event of the year. It's our triple threat event. Sarah Lemos will be there. I'll be on hand. Shane Pittman will be there. We also have Bill Chappell, who's going to do a special guest appearance, and our own techie, Kevin Swanson. We're going to have an amazing time over the weekend, and we'd love for you to come out and be a part of it. All the information on those events and so many more are right at darknessevents.com. All right, Jim Harold, our guest tonight. We've only got time probably for a couple more short stories here before we have to part ways and say goodnight, but we will have Jim back again, as we always do, on a future episode. Jim, have you personally had anything scare you in this, with a paranormal sense?
The only thing I would say was scare me would be actually a personal event that happened to me way before podcasting. I was, I think, 18 years old. I was visiting family down in West Virginia. And this isn't traditional paranormal, but I think there's a paranormal aspect to it. Me and a young lady were walking, and, I was being, quite the impressive young teenager,
Sure.
Trying to get in her good graces. And we were walking along, and we came up on this log truck, and it was on the side of the road. And we split up bread and butter style. One went on one side, one on the other. And something told me, get away from that log truck. Not audibly, but something said, you need to get away from this log truck. And we passed it, and we resumed talking about TV or whatever we were talking about. Probably like Ferris Bueller or something, probably at the time this happened or something like that. But anyway, we go about 20 feet, I'd say, and I hear a big rumble. And I turn around, and every log on the side of that I was walking on, that log truck, fell off. Ooh. And would have certainly killed me. Now, that's not the, ooh, you give me the creeps kind of scare. That's like, I could have died scared.
Yeah.
And the fact that something told me to get away from. Now, the skeptic would say, you subconsciously sensed the breaking of the chains and the micro sounds of it or something. It's like, I don't think so. I think it was a guardian angel of some type. Whether that was a past family member or whatever that was, something protected me and told me to quicken my pace.
Very cool. Very cool. And thank God they did. So you're still here with us today. And again, folks, remember to check out Jim Harold's Paranormal Podcast and his Campfire Paranormal Podcast and stories. Always great stuff. And you can follow him. We have links for Jim on today's program guide as well. All right, Jim, give us another good story from the new book. What's a good thriller to leave us with this evening?
Okay. Well, this one, I believe in good, but I also believe that the other side exists. This one's called The Devil is Real. This is a short one. So the caller basically loved to play with, Mariah from Pennsylvania, loved to play with Ouija boards when she was a kid. Okay. So her and her friend would play almost every night, Molly. They would play with it over the summer. And they kept contacting this one spirit, Gail, who seemed very innocuous and like nothing bad would happen. Now, they had heard something about putting the board on the floor might be disrespectful, so they decided, let's prop it up on something. So with this old, unplugged, broken guitar amp. So they put it on, and they start doing the thing. And the planchette stops and everything gets still and everything gets spooky. And remember, this old amp looks to be broken. It's unplugged. All of a sudden, it switches itself on. And it sounds like an old-time radio, like... And it's like, this thing's unplugged. How's it on? And all of a sudden, it sounds like a southern preacher comes through. And he says, "The devil is real." And then it switches itself off. And my caller said her and her friend, they almost killed each other trying to get out of that room. She said she did play with the Ouija board again, but never on that app and never in that room again. Never again. No. For me, Dave, that would be it. I would say, okay, I'm good, because when you have things physically turning themselves on when they're unplugged, that's a bridge too far for me. It's like, okay, I've gotten over my depth.
I love it. Jim Harold, a great guest, always an amazing host of his own podcasts, True Ghost Stories. Jim Harold's Campfire Volume 6 is out and available tomorrow, May 7th. Make sure that you pick up a copy, rate and review them as well, and make sure to follow Jim. If you love the paranormal and you love podcasts, this is the guy you should be tuning into and checking out as well. Believe it or not, there are some of us in this field that do believe in unity and believe in sharing the wealth of letting people hear, because Jim and I can talk to the exact same guest and sometimes have completely different interviews because of what we bring to the mix. Jim will always be one of my favorite podcasters and favorite hosts, and I hope he'll become one of yours as well. Jim, as always, thank you for being here with me, my friend.
Thank you for the kind words, and don't listen to one or the other, listen to both.
That's right. That's right.
And thank you so much, Dave. You've been very, very kind and always a great friend.
We will be back Wednesday with the Paranormal 60 news crew, and I have it on good authority. Everyone is going to be back this week. So make sure you tune in and catch up with Chachi, the Colonel, Greg, and Sweet Tea, and me, your host, Dave Schrader, right here on the Paranormal 60.